sides. So it will be at work in the UFO community, creating conflict, divide and rule, putting disinformation in there. It's the same in all areas. In this conspiracy research, it puts people in there to divide and rule and mislead. And so we've got to start getting streetwise and starting to filter information and look at it without taking it on face value, including what I say. And we've got to start working together as a unit instead of allowing this divide and rule to go on, because just look at the world.
Without, David, without intervention, what kind of timeline do you see?
If you look at the Gregorian calendar and the way it's been structured to focus consciousness on the end of a cycle across what we call the millennium. Now, there's a number of things that are going to unfold here. I've already talked about the fact that many chaos cards will be played to create fear, to create division, and therefore have a global demand for something must be done, and then the agenda comes in. But also, whenever you get to an end of a cycle or a definite point or what appears to be a point in time, especially the end of a millennium, you get the consciousness start to think about, well, let's draw a line here. Let's look at all the conflict we've had in this century. Look at all the conflict we've had up to this point in this millennium. Let's start again. Let's have a new world. Let's have a blank sheet of paper. And if you can create chaos in the run-up to that and across that point, that even more encourages this mentality of, come on, we've got to start again. We need a new world. And if you can then control the nature of that new world and you persuade people that centralization of power is people coming together, then you can put in global centralized institutions and you can mask them as the world coming together as one. I've talked to people, for instance, Art, in this area that's called the New Age, and they equate oneness, the world coming together as one people, with world government, world central bank, world army, not everybody, but significant numbers. And we need to see the difference between people coming together, having power over their own lives in their own communities, cooperating with each other across national borders, looking after each other, caring for each other, and what is actually the opposite of that, centralized institutions that are designed to put power into tiny number of hands at a global level. And I'll give you an example of where it's going, and this is already happening. When the European Central Bank for the European Union comes into force, as it is now, the currency of Europe, which will be one currency, the interest rates and what happens about that currency across the whole of Europe will be controlled by 6 unelected bankers with an 8-year guaranteed period of tenure. And not even the elected part of the European Union will be able to influence or override the economic decisions of those bankers. That's fascism. And if you look at the fascist symbol from which we get the word fascist, it's actually an ancient Roman symbol, which is a series of rods tied together very tightly with an axe head at the top. That's where we get the word fascism from, that Roman symbol. I've just described the European Union, which is countries tied together tightly under a centralized bureaucratic dictatorship. And of course NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, is designed to create in stepping stones the America's version of the European Union. Because of course the European Union, what we joined in Europe, was not a centralized bureaucratic dictatorship, which we now have. But we actually joined a free trade area. That's David, what it was supposed to be.
Right, but David, don't we need it? If we want to compete with the Asian bloc and the European bloc, we have to do that, don't we?
Well, this is an interesting point. Again, we get the word compete and we get the word blocks. Because this goes back so far, And it has to. I mean, you cannot create the structures of manipulation that we have today in a few minutes, a few years, a few decades.
But, David, it's also a natural evolution. In other words, first we had little villages. They traded with other villages. Then cities trading with cities. Areas trading with areas. States trading with states. Nations trading with nations. And now blocks of nations trading with blocks of nations. And then, obviously, next, a one-world economy.
Yeah, the question is this: when you follow the story and you see how the agenda has actually been unfolding over a very long period of time, is that natural or is that created? When you look at the way that the whole thing's unfolded, like I said, you look at this century, but you go further back, and what you've just described actually is the process over this period of time that I'm talking about, thousands of years, and it's got quicker and quicker the more that these bloodlines have expanded their power, particularly after the expansion of the European and particularly British empires across the world, which took these bloodlines right across the planet. This thing's advanced and got quicker. But what you've just described is the process of power going into fewer and fewer and fewer hands.
Absolutely.
Now, where's it going to end? If this continues, it's going to end with the very agenda that is demonstrably being introduced now, which is complete centralization of global power. I mean, how ludicrous that we have in Europe, and this is just the stepping stone before the global level, that European laws made by bureaucrats in Brussels override nationally, apparently democratically decided laws in the individual countries. And that's just the blueprint which is being prepared for the global level, where what is dictated to at a world government level will override decisions made in your community, decisions made in your country. We're going to have a global fascist state. But of course, if that was offered openly, there'd be a reaction against it. So it's being done stepping stone style, one step following another, leading in this direction, while each step is projected in the public arena as completely unconnected to the other.
How do you know it's inevitably going to be fascist? I certainly agree that we're headed toward a single control ultimately, but how can you be sure of the nature of that control?
Well, all you've got to do is look, and the research is possible, at the people who are pressing for this to happen. I mean, if anyone's not got curly hair or hair that stands on end, then they will do when they read The Biggest Secret, because in February, because I've exposed what these major players are involved in. People like Kissinger, whose power didn't end when he ceased to be Secretary of State. He operates through an organization called Kissinger Associates, and that would make anyone's hair curl when you see what that's involved in. And you look at the major players and the names that keep coming up, and you look at what they're involved in. It's just utterly staggering what they're involved in. The royal family. In Britain, when the story comes out, as it's going to in the book, what they're involved in, it is utterly, utterly grotesque and staggering. So you look at the personalities, the attitudes of the people who are pressing for this centralization and are manipulating it, and my goodness me, you can see where they're really coming from. And, we've got to, I think, see the difference, as I said earlier, between centralization of power and cooperation. I have no problem with global organizations that coordinate between nation states and people in their communities, that create networks of cooperation so we can help each other and all that stuff. No problem with trading and all that stuff if it's done on a fair basis. But the further that decision-making goes from the people affected by the decisions, the worse the decisions become. And now we're in a situation, we're one step away, indeed we're closing in on it fast, where decisions that fundamentally affect 5 billion or more people will be taken by a literal handful. And that is fascism. But of course, fascism and communism are the same thing. It's still centralization of power and dictatorship. It's just a different name on the door and a different dress on that door.
You cannot imagine a benign dictatorship.
Well, I think it's a contradiction in terms. If we're going to be free, we need to be free to have control over our own lives and not be dictated to by anyone. And for me, three things would change this world and change our lives. One, as individuals, we step out of the biggest prison that we live in, and the prison that allows this manipulation to go on and always has. The fear of what other people think of us. Once you're in fear of what other people think, you are no longer living your life, you're living theirs. And if you can set the agenda of what is, like I said earlier, this hassle-free zone of what's right and wrong, what's good and bad, what's moral or immoral, what's sane or insane, then you set the agenda of how people judge each other.
All right, David, I think I've got it. Hold it right there for a moment.